Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Today, I'm being joined by a very special guest, Dr. Xaulanda Simmonds-Emmanuel. She is an IO psychologist, or industrial and organizational psychologist, and she is also an expert on the topic of work passion, which is the topic of today's discussion. Welcome to part 2 as Dr. Xaulanda Simmonds-Emmanuel and I discuss the topic of work passion. So you had mentioned a sense of control over one's work as being a way to influence one's passion for their work. Are there other variables that would influence whether or not somebody feels passionate about their work?
Yeah, I think people's ability to have the self-agency, to have autonomy over their work, whether they feel that they have the competency to function within that role, and as leaders, if their skill sets are not to the level that's needed, providing that support, creating a work environment where people feel that they're being treated equitably and fairly and equally across the board, regardless of who they are, right? Creating those inclusive environments. So those are some of the things that helps to ensure that people are passionate about their work, right? Because I mean, the fact of that matter is some people take a job because they need to sustain their livelihood. Others are able to take a job that's more aligned with their purpose or their passions, right? And so it's just figuring out for that particular individual where their passions lie and how you can bring those into whatever role that they're in at that point in time.
So when we look at factors that influence one's passion for their work, would you say that they're mostly internal, external, or mixed?
I would say it's a combination of both.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, the external really would fall on the job characteristics, the organizational characteristics, the relationships that they have within the workplace. But the internal, at least when I did my research in predicting work passion, the internal aspects that I found were like mindfulness and motivation and diversity climate were critical. Yeah.
So work passion sounds pretty good. What kind of effects would it have or could it have on an individual employee, on their work experience, on the quality of their work, their output? What kind of effects could work passion have on someone?
So harmonious work passion is typically associated with psychological well-being, self-realization, enhancing performance, which are associated with those positive emotions and engagement when they're involved in that work activity, right? Um, the obsessive side is often associated, like I mentioned before, with burnout, anxiety, stress, right? And having a negative impact on one's lives. So the research has found that there are more positive perspectives to passion and its characteristics and the development within varied contexts once you're able to, one, understand the individual, and to be able to curate an environment which would help to support that passion.
So, considering that organizations are a collection of individuals, I think
Mhm.
it's safe to assume that work passion in terms of individuals' experience must have some kind of effect on the organization as a whole. What can you
Mhm.
say about that?
Well, I think the most closely related construct that has a lot of popularity is employee engagement, right? When we look at Gallup and they say approximately 70% of employees are either disengaged or actively disengaged, looking at what those employees are passionate about and how to create a work environment where they can leverage those strengths and those opportunities so that they can become more engaged will help organizations, one, increase productivity, right? Would help them to reduce certain things such as higher absenteeism or turnover because they're not happy within the environment that they're in. So there are benefits to organizations in taking the time to really explore this construct of passion and how their employees can work more within their passion points and create an environment of inclusion, right? Where they can improve the productivity and reduce costs.
So, going along those lines, assuming that
Mhm,
an organization can influence an employee's passion towards their
mhm.
work, what can they do? What can an organization do to encourage or support passion at the workplace towards one's work?
Well, our background is in IO psychology. So having an IO psychologist on board might not be such a bad idea, right? And, you know, industrial organizational psychology is not necessarily a field that a lot of people understand or know about, but really using research and applying it within the work setting so that you implement best practices to help improve those work related challenges that you might have on an individual employee level, on a team level, or an organizational level is extremely beneficial. But I think even before we start to educate people on industrial organizational psychology, a lot more professionals are familiar with human resources, right? Most of us have filled out applications, have been recruited, have had jobs, have gone through that whole process. But organizations really understanding that HR is beyond an administrative function, but really is a strategic opportunity for them to work with their teams in conjunction with an IO psychologist to be able to make sure that the processes from the time they're being selected, right, or recruited to the time that they decide to exit for whatever reason is really a comprehensive strategy that looks at the individual's competencies, that looks at the individual's strengths, that look at different ways of assessing that employee. And then also concurrently assessing the organization to make sure that the people they're bringing on is a good fit for the organization and that the organization is being dynamic, right? Because we're always evolving, and clearly having, you know, vision, mission, values. Those core values are so important when you look at the alignment of the organization and the employees, because I think now more than ever, especially after 2020, employees are holding organizations to what they say, right? It's no longer that you can have these nice vision, mission statements, and core values plastered on the wall. Employees are holding organizations accountable to make sure that what they say, they're going to do what they say and say what they do, right? So there's that level of accountability. So I think really looking at their HR strategy and also incorporating some of those best practices from industrial organizational psychology would be helpful for organizations.
So, given that most companies, most organizations have an HR department,
Mm-hmm.
they already have a starting point. And if they utilize that department to its fullest capability, they are in a much better place to
Mm-hmm.
encourage and support passion for individuals' work than they may be aware of, than they may
Mm-hmm.
realize. And then to take
Right.
that to the next level, incorporating an IO psychologist or an IO practitioner could really put them in a good position. And considering our conversation today and how important passion for one's work is and how beneficial it can be, not only to the individual experience, but to the collective well-being of the organization. To people like you and me, to IO psychologists and practitioners, this is a no-brainer.
Right,
But the
right.
reality is that we have to have these conversations to make employers aware of what they
Mhm,
already have and where they can go with these resources.
mhm, mhm. And the thing is that, or to your point, organizations are made up of individuals and people, right? So having human resources elevated to the point where it's part of the strategy, part of the leadership team, and it's trickled down throughout everything that's being done within the organization, looking at work related issues and challenges that are going to help create an environment where people can truly thrive, right? Where they can feel included, where they can excel ultimately, for us IO psychologists and practitioners, is what we would want every organization to be able to do, right?
Mhm. Do you have any final insights or thoughts for us on this topic, or any topic really that you'd like to share that would be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about work passion. I'm very intentional with making sure that whenever I select a project or I'm working with a client, that there's that value alignment. And I think something as basic as really having a good understanding of the organization's core values and the individual's core values, and determining whether there's that alignment is probably the first great step to determine whether or not somebody would be able to be passionate within that space, right? Because whether we have one position within an organization, that individual who's in that position within the organization is working with a team of people in a unit or a department or a division, and they're working within the context of that organization. So fundamentally, it comes down to that value alignment and having the opportunity for that individual to constantly appraise the organization, and the organization to constantly be refining their organizational culture and work environment to ensure that the employees that they have on board are able to thrive. I think is an important concept for people to focus on as they're moving their organizations forward. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such an important point, because sometimes people think of organizations as these set in stone things, but an organization is, you can think of it as a living entity. It has a
Mm-hmm.
beginning, it has a lifespan, and it has an end at some point. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in order to thrive, rather than just exist, an
Mm-hmm.
organization has to be an ever evolving entity. That's not to say that they should make changes for the sake of making changes, right? If
Right.
work, leave it alone.
Mm-hmm.
But don't leave it alone so much that you never change. So that's
Right. Right. There's an intentionality that needs to be embedded in that, right? Because I mean, we know from group dynamics, you can have a really great team, and just by adding one person to that team or subtracting one person from that team dynamic changes, right? And in the changing of that team dynamics, it could either negatively or positively impact the way that person appraises their role within that team, right? And whether they're able to really tap into their passion points within that team, within the role on that team, and then within the larger context of the organization. So to your point, it's not leaving it up to chance. It's something that really needs to be at the forefront of how do we create work environments where employees can thrive, right?
Mhm.
And one way of doing that is finding out what are their passion points, where are their strengths, and how we can leverage that within their respective roles so that not only that individual, but the collective is able to thrive.
Wonderful. Work passion. What an exceptional topic that I think is overlooked
Mhm.
so much. We tend to, I think people tend to think of it as an unattainable bonus that maybe others are able to
Mhm.
enjoy, but
Mhm.
not necessarily something that the everyday employee should strive for. But clearly, I
Mhm.
think you have taught me, and I think the audience, that this isn't some unicorn that is
Yep.
only available for few, that everybody can
Mhm.
pursue being passionate about what they do, and whether it's about their job in its entirety or certain aspects of their job,
Mhm.
something is better than nothing, and there are clear benefits for both the individual and the organization. So this
Yeah.
has been a delightful conversation. Thank
Aw.
you so much for joining me. I really
Well,
enjoyed
thank
it.
you for having me. It's so wonderful to see you.
It's lovely to see you as well. Thank you so much, and I hope we get to do this again in the future, because I think it would
Absolutely.
be wonderful to do that.
Yes. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. All right. For those of you who are experiencing this episode in an audio-only version, I invite you to check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. The link for that is in the description below. In addition to the podcast, my YouTube channel also contains videos pertaining to stress management, so I encourage you to check it out. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.